All right, I want to jump back on here, talk about game one of the OJLL playoffs last night between Orangeville and Beaches. We did a preview for this series, and then also want to talk about Brampton versus Mimico coming up tonight as well. So night one, obviously a highly anticipated series here between Beaches and Orangeville. Orangeville takes the first game 12-8. I think they just had better jump from the start. I think they're ready to play at Tony Rose. The home floor advantage is obviously very important up there, and it will look to be important throughout these playoffs. Sets up a pretty much a must-win for Beaches going back to Ted Reeve. Just a 5-game series in the first round. That's really the biggest difference between the first round and when these teams, we thought we might see these teams later in the playoffs. But 5 games, Beaches really has to win on Sunday night at Ted Reeve, because coming back to Tony Rose for a closeout game and then having to win 2 more, including another one in Tony Rose in game 5, seems tough. So you got to hold floor if you're Beaches and then try to steal one of the games at Tony Rose. But we'll see how that goes as the playoffs go on. Joey Spallina was really the story for me in this one. 5 goals, 2 assists. He was dynamic, and he was getting to the goal. I think that's the best sign for Orangeville, and it happened right away. His first goal was a great take underneath. They were getting underneath a lot on the Beaches defenders. Liam Matthews had a couple. Spallina had a couple. Dylan Sanderson also had a couple. So if you're the Beaches, you got to try to keep those guys in front of you. Got to try to keep avoid getting beat underneath. Easy to say, obviously, as an offensive player as well, but I think that was important for the Ville. And then the other big story for me, maybe not big in terms of numbers, but big in terms of the flow of the game, was Orangeville wins the transition battle 2-0. So 8 long scores. Cole Tuple gets a nice one early in the game. Thought that really set the tone for Orangeville, and in a game that was only decided by 4 goals. Those 2 transition goals and none for Beaches really make a difference. So look for the Beaches guys who want to get up and run, like guys like Eric McDonald, Petterkin, Harlan, Hewitt, guys who can get up and move, and Hamish McPherson. We've also seen him play mostly offense this year, playing out the back door now. So look for those guys to get involved, and they got to try to keep the Orangeville guys off the score sheet. Aiden Long especially has more goals than games played this year. Very unusual and impressive for a defender. He was playing a lot of offense yesterday to cut the break and to get back on defense and to pin offensive players for Beaches back there. He's been really good in this series, but you got to try to keep those guys off the score sheet, especially in breakaways. If they're going to score in settled situations, that is what it is. And the other kind of storyline I thought was the ball pressure and general pressure of the Orangeville defense. I thought was successful. They made it hard to transition the ball on the outside for the Beaches, made it really hard to move the ball. Beaches is a team that relies on east-west passing through the middle of the zone. Really hard to do that when every guy's got someone sticky on them. Now, the counter to that defense is when it breaks big, because everyone's spread. There's no one to help. So we'll see if Beaches can scheme up some ways to get open against that really high-pressure defense. History would suggest with Coach O'Connor and the great players they have that they'll figure something out there. But that's something to watch, is how can they get easier touches closer to the goal throughout the rest of the series. Other than that, Connor O'Toole is fantastic. Obviously, if he plays that well, it's going to be tough for Beaches, but it's a long series and a lot of good lacrosse left to be played. It was an outstanding game 1. A little bit of everything, some great goals, some really nice saves, a little bit of animosity there, and I'm sure that will only continue to grow. So make sure to get to Ted Reeve on Sunday. Should be a really good one, and this is going to be a really fun rest of the series. And then switching to the Mimico versus Brampton series, that game 1 kicks off tonight at Mimico Arena. I'll be on the call with Matthew Carrick for the OJLL. Should be a good one. We joked about it last night, but history would obviously suggest series between Mimico and Brampton tend to be pretty exciting if you were both a fan of goals and extracurriculars on the floor. So I've been a part of them. They're really fun, and expect this one to be no different. As for the lacrosse, kind of 2 interesting games between these 2 teams just in the last week. Brampton beat Mimico on July 3rd, 10-9, and then Mimico smoked them on just on last Tuesday, 16-3. So kind of wondering what teams we'll see here. The reality is this has been one of the more interesting seasons I can remember from a team from Brampton. They trade Bowie Horseman, Dante Bowen, and Connor O'Toole at the deadline, and then they kind of keep winning. And one of the secrets to their success has been Nolan Byrne, kind of a underappreciated player, a guy who has played in multiple teams over the course of his junior grade career. By any measure, has been one of the best players in the OJLL this year and has really thrived, in the time that he's kind of been running the show there. So it's been an interesting season for them. Maybe some folks thought they'd drop off a little bit quicker once they made the trade, but they've really held on. again, a tough loss, 16-3 last week to Mimico. So we'll see, how these two teams stack up. If you're Mimico, the main thing is you want to get your swagger back. It was a great start to the season, for a while undefeated, and then a couple rough patches in there. There's no doubt about it. They tell you that themselves. How do you get your swagger, get some confidence going? I saw them play at Ted Reeve against Beaches, and then they looked awesome. They looked mean. They looked hungry, and they have a lot of good players and a lot of old players. I again alluded to it on the broadcast last night in Orangeville, but this team looks like a Minto Cup team in terms of how many fifth years they have. This is typically how it goes. Burlington last year had something like 13 fifth-year players. Mimico, has quite a lot, and a lot of them are up front. Finn Thompson is a fifth-year. Dudemaine Waters, Isaiah Moran Weeks are some of the best players in the league, and they're fifth-year players. On that note, curious what we're going to see from Finn. He's been one of the best players in the country for a couple of years now. Maybe slightly off his pace from previous years, but that's more because his pace has been so ridiculous in other years. Excited to see what he has in store throughout the playoffs, and when he gets going, I think he's in a pretty small class of players, even above some of the other biggest name guys. He's extremely talented. He's bigger than people realize, and he's got a really deep bag of tricks in terms of shooting, and I'm really excited to see how that goes on. And then the other big story is Mimico's ability to run. They ran very successfully on Brampton last week. McDonnell had 2. Tavares had 1, Taguri had 1. If they can get those defensive guys up in the play and scoring, obviously that's a good recipe for success. They have guys who can really handle the ball throughout their lineup. Maybe not the biggest team ever, but a lot of guys who can really move back there. If they can get the run game going, they're going to be good. And a big part of that as well is these big offensive players like Justin Lee, Finn Thompson, Waters, Dudemaine. They can really wreak havoc on the forecheck or the ride, and their ability to kind of create chaos in those scenarios is important. I think Brampton, especially when they're playing at Memorial, obviously one of the smallest rinks in the country, a little bit more suited for the half floor, so their ability to kind of slow it down might be useful against Mimico, although, again, that big Mimico offense is tough in the half floor. I did want to mention also that the game between Mimico and Brampton, when they did win, that was the first start of the year for Gavin Clark. We've seen Marcus Medill play most of the rest of the games after Connor O'Toole has been out. He's been really good. He was part of that 10-9 game that was much closer, and obviously a win for Brampton in that first one. So expecting him to be back in there, expecting this one to be a tighter game and two pretty evenly matched teams. This should be another really fun series and a playoff that I don't think any of us will soon forget here. So should be a good one. Game 1 goes tonight, Saturday night at Mimico Arena, the Drummond Street Bowl. It's going to be hot in there, as it always is, and it's going to be a pleasure to be there. I'll be on the call with the OJLL and Matthew Carrick at 7 p.m. We'll see you then.